Welcome to Shakeshero, the podcast that bridges the gap between you and all things Shakespeare. I'm Chloe Baldwin.
I'm Paul Stafford, and today we're not going to be breaking down a play, but we're going to be talking about something that I'm going to go ahead and title The Landscape of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And it has to do with just kind of the basic groundwork of what somebody might want to know or might find interesting or might help contextualize how they should consume a lot of these plays, whether it be time period based or like what was his target audience based or just, like I for example, I've done a good bit of world traveling for someone in my position, and I've been to Europe, been to Asia, been to a lot of different museums, a lot of different historical places, and I've had varying degrees of
culture
fun,
shock.
or fun, or like it hit me, the profundity of what I was looking at and where I was hit me very differently based on how much I knew about it beforehand.
Sure.
So like how much cultural history to understand what this monument means, or this site, or this battlefield. And there's been other times where like I've been something and I'm like, I wish I had it because I knew this would be a lot more important to me, or like I would have a much more rich experience if I had the context to appreciate it.
Yeah, so maybe at some level this is partially like logistical context and partially emotional context.
Exactly. And so we were just, kind of doing our due diligence and like looking through possible productions that we were going to like, because we noticed that the episodes are a lot better when it's a good production. So we were like at least trying to get like a few reviews on it. And as I was kind of going through all of the list of Shakespeare's works, I had didn't really have a good method of like deciphering which ones would be good. I have zero idea which ones would be good to do next or first or anything. So all these questions came into my head that I was going to ask Chloe, and I feel like we should just go ahead and talk about them on the podcast.
Yeah, this is a great way to bridge the gap.
Yeah, it seemed like it would be good for me to know and for anybody else to know if you aren't already aware. And so this episode might be geared more towards the layman, but it also might be fun to listen to, or to, just decide if you agree with.
Yeah.
If you are already initiated.
As the nerd in the room, I'm really excited for this too. I feel like this is a pop quiz on something that I love. I promise if I don't know something, I'll tell you I don't know, and then I'll find out later and put it in the notes or put an afterword or something.
I'm sure you will, just because you're just kind of study this stuff for fun, but like
nerd.
Yeah, some stuff we'll just get into it.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to, it was funny because you were like asking, sometimes you make arguments like for how you see Shakespeare, and like kind of how I've come to see it as well, because I'm just a very pragmatic person.
Welcome.
And I have no allegiance to tradition, really.
Right.
And only to the extent that it is still practical.
I would describe myself as similarly practical, but I would lean more in the sentimental direction than you.
Yes, I'm a little bit more robotic.
Yeah, I think we're good for each other that way, because we help each other find the center a little bit.
Exactly. So, but I'm kind of laying that down to get to like you wouldn't consider yourself someone who sees Shakespeare, or like the vast majority of people see Shakespeare. Like I feel like at least the way you talk about it, you never actually said this with words, but you seem to be in a small minority of your philosophy on how we look at Shakespeare and how to perform Shakespeare.
I would say I feel like I think so many people have very different perspectives on Shakespeare. The people that I run into in
this
my world.
This is good too. Like if I'm wrong about that, like correct me.
No. I think it's an interesting question, because the people that I run into in my world are probably different than the vast majority of people, because I know a lot of artists and actors and theater and filmmakers. So I have like a couple of different classes of people in my head that I think of, but I'm sure there are more types of people out there.
Yeah.
So I know some people look at Shakespeare in a very academic way. They want to know as much about his life and the history of him as possible. Some people have their pet theories about like Shakespeare wasn't actually Shakespeare. Like his works were not written by this man named William Shakespeare. They were written by a duke who then who then gave the plays to William Shakespeare and was like, publish them under your name so that I don't have, the lewd title of a playwright associated with me, or sometimes people think that Shakespeare was a woman disguised as a man, or sometimes people think that Shakespeare was a woman who gave the plays to Shakespeare. I'm talking about the person who wrote the plays.
Yeah.
Was someone who gave the plays to Shakespeare to publish or to perform. And they're very intent on that, and that's of the utmost importance to them.
And it would inform how you would, like, analyze some things.
Right. Absolutely. Or it could.
It could.
Anyway.
It doesn't have to. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But there are people that I would classify as like an academic, or there are people that I would classify as
conspiracy theory. No, I'm kidding.
Conspiracy. There are some. I definitely know some conspiracy theorists for Shakespeare. And sometimes, and a lot of times I would say that if someone leans in the academic direction, if they go all the way with it and they're someone who's like creating these plays, I would say they're like a purist, like someone who's like, we can't cut it. It has to be done this way. We should do it in original dress, or like, just we should do this as close as possible to original practice, which, in some instances can have some really interesting effects if you use original practices. In some ways, like, for instance, the dialect that they spoke at the time that Shakespeare was alive, I can already hear people in my head being like, it's not that similar, but it's kind of similar to the way that we speak in America now, especially in the way of they had R's. Like, when you think about RP, or like the way that British people talk today, it's, that you drop the R's at the end of words. But with the way that they talked then, there were a lot more R's that were used at the ends of words. So in some ways, it's more similar to American contemporary dialect than to British contemporary dialect, which is really interesting.
Because some people, without thinking about it, will just put on a British accent doing Shakespeare.
Totally. Which is so funny.
That's something that you also believe. You don't think that someone should be trying to do like Shakespeare speak. You think you should just speak plainly the words.
Totally. Like, I think that, and I would actually, when I'm thinking about, archetypes of different people that like Shakespeare, another one that comes into my head is people that, hold it in such high regard, and that, it's on a pedestal, and that they really want, it's some sort of fancy thing. And I think it doesn't have to be that, which is kind of the camp that I fall into with Shakespeare, that to me feels very scrappy, but very real and visceral. And like, I want to take these words off the page and find out where they live in my body, and it's messy, and it's human, and it's complicated. And that's what I like about it. And sure, there's a loftiness to some of the structure because it's written in poetry, but in a way that's kind of human too, because you're cramming all of these ridiculous, like, complicated feelings that can't possibly be expressed verbally into this very structure-oriented poetry. And that in and of itself feels very human, because, as humans, we have all of these complicated, and not just feelings either, but complicated actions we have to take, or complicated ways we live our lives. And that has to be expressed through words. Like, there's no way you can cram all of that experience into words.
It's funny, the way you were describing it right now makes me think of the concept of musicals and like the non-diegetic song that gets put into an encounter or a real life situation that the characters don't acknowledge that they're singing or dance. And I feel like poetry just seems like it could be another branch of that.
Yeah.
Like, it could just be the thing, like who actually speaks like that? Like, who actually sings who breaks into song when they're talking? Like, nobody. But this is a vehicle that we're using for these motions that we're trying to get across with art.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to think about it. I know that a lot of people consider that consider Shakespearean actors good at musicals and musical actors good at doing Shakespeare, or at least they're more naturally inclined to it if they've practiced one or the other.
It's funny.
Because of the kind of, sometimes people would describe it as heightened nature of it, but I don't know if that's exactly how I'd describe it. But just that similar kind of thing where it's like, I get drawn into this more abstract thing, but it's still part of my reality. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Sorry, I went kind of down a rabbit trail there, but I think it was really interesting.
That's kind of, because we talk about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And immediately, we've never actually broken down like the camps of people that are in Shakespeare.
But those are just a couple too. Like, I think, in general,
I think just realize, so again, for the layman, like this is what I'm trying to frame this for, or like, past me that wish I understood this. that's even just to realize there's different camps.
Totally.
Is incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Of, like kind of taking in what you're seeing when you see a production. You're never going to see an original. So all you're always seeing is a rehashing. So just to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is obvious to a lot of people, but it wasn't to me, and I still have to like kind of remember. So I'm assuming that I'm still speaking for like a good amount of people who...
Yeah, and I think it's good to realize, too.
Who don't know about the culture of Shakespeare.
Yeah, and I think it's good to realize, too, like, and when I talk about these different archetypes, like, I think the way that I want to be is having a little bit of all of those people in me, like, having respect for the language and, being academic about it and researching, but at the same time, always coming back to it's human. And I think that, and I also feel like I don't want to be down too much on people that lean in one direction or another. And I also want to acknowledge that I am just one specific voice. I think that I'm right, and I think that everyone should look at Shakespeare in this complicated way that I look at it, but it doesn't mean I'm right, and it doesn't mean that everyone should. So...
Well, I like the way you look at it, and I'm going to go ahead and say that. And I know you're making the caveat for like all the arguments that may come your way.
Yeah,
if somebody listening to that.
Because the other thing is I can hear them all in my head.
Yeah, I do the same thing, trust me. But I think it's okay to just, voice your opinion of what you like. While all those things are are mixed up in the stew that is your philosophy of Shakespeare, you do still have a value structure, and the thing that you value the most will be the last thing to get triaged when you're trying to like decide what call to make on this thing.
For sure.
And so that's just your value when you...
I'm definitely not hedging my opinion. Yeah. I love my opinion. I'm definitely going to stand by what I believe, but I definitely want to acknowledge that,
Yeah,
Shakespeare
it didn't sound like you were saying everybody else sucks.
Shakespeare wrote all these 400-year-old texts, so there are going to be a lot of different opinions on them,
For sure.
Just based on different people's perspectives and how they came to it.
I find myself personally agreeing with you about it needing to feel natural now and kind of valuing that the most.
I think that's important.
If what we're trying to do is make art that entertains and connects with people.
Yeah, I think if I were to describe it, if I were to boil it down past even brevity, I would boil it down to it needs to be human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just vague enough to work, for sure.
Exactly. That's my evil plan, Paul. It's been my evil plan this whole time.
You fucking politician. Okay, so...
Paul, I'm an actor. It's the same thing.
You're a senator. Sorry. That was
good. That was a reference.
Man, what can I say? I know Shakespeare, guys. Well, I've seen a bunch of plays. I'm basically a Shakespeare scholar.
Paul,
what can I say?
That was pretty cool.
Okay, so the next thing is that when I was looking up a list of his plays to try to decide what comes next, what comes up is always 3 different lists.
Yeah.
A list of comedies, a list of tragedies, and a list of histories. And I feel like I might be overanalyzing it or making it too complicated to say, what are those? Because I understand what a comedy is, and it's just breaking up to his genres. But what's a history play? Is he? I don't know enough about to recall. And I also haven't seen these plays.
Yeah.
Is it like Tarantino? Is it like his historical fiction or historical for Shakespeare to have done a history play, quote unquote?
No, that is actually the perfect analogy. It's historical fiction. Like Richard III, Richard III was probably kind of a dick. I'm sure a lot of the people in that history that were fighting each other and taking down other royals were kind of dicks. At the very least, very disagreeable. But the person who was in charge of England at the time was from the family that defeated Richard's family. So Shakespeare, in a way, kind of had to make Richard look bad.
Interesting.
Because this new family was in power and had taken them down.
That's fascinating. That's a fascinating lens to understand about that play you're watching.
Yeah. So when we're talking about historical fiction, if you're talking about Tarantino, Inglourious Basterds,
it's propaganda mixed in with the play.
It's kind of propaganda, and it might have aligned with his viewpoint, but it's definitely something he couldn't have done the opposite thing of if he believed that.
Exactly.
At the time, I mean, maybe he could have, but it probably wouldn't have gone over very well.
He probably would have died.
Yeah. It's very possible, and he and his company.
That already is huge for me. I didn't understand that.
It's very interesting. It's very political, and it's interesting too because in some ways playwrights and actors and theater troupes were at a very low tier of society. And like, the other entertainment that was going on down the street was like bear baiting, which is where you have like a dog and a bear on a chain and the dogs fight the bear and to the death. Like, it's...
good, clean fun.
Good, clean fun, So, it was kind of like a ratty thing to do at some level. But at another level, you also had like the Queen coming to see shows sometimes, or like, lords commissioning, like the Lord Chamberlain's Men was who his company was. Like, they were being patronized by the Lord Chamberlain. Like those kind of things.
They were being fun, like sponsored by a rich lord.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. So
so they had to it's like network execs having to have a say before they greenlight the show.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So he has to accommodate all these filters and still try to make something that's entertaining, but also
deep.
That gets them out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is kind of the plight of all artists forever.
It really is. And it also makes me think, man, if Shakespeare could do it, we got...
Or say fuck it.
We got no excuse, man, to not
But have some sort of like means of living.
Yeah.
Like, we can't all be like Banksy. Like
can't we? No,
I don't know. Nobody knows who he is.
He's probably got a day job.
Works at Blake's.
He would.
It's an arts and crafts store for anyone who doesn't live in Chicago.
That was good. It was funny, Paul. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting about the context in which they lived. What was the original question? It was about each of the categories,
comedies, tragedies, and histories. Like, so histories is when I had the most questions about.
So the histories, like that probably has the most bearing over the histories, because the histories were really about like they're historical fiction about things that everyone would have known. Like, England is generally the setting, about English royal family history, and it's interesting.
I would imagine the histories are tragedies as well, or comedies.
Time, I mean,
so that's what I'm saying. Like, why give them this distinction? And is it historical fiction? So that clearly is yes, but I'm sure there's more to talk about.
They're definitely historical fiction, and I think that I can't say this 100% for sure, but I think they would have known at the time. Like, the audience watching would have been like, this is not exactly what happened. Like, and clearly they're speaking poetry on stage, so it's clearly not verbatim what happened, So anyway, so you got histories. Most of those are set in England. Pretty much everything else is set outside of England. Like, he purposefully would move through time and space to create a certain level of separation from his audience and the characters on stage. Because, and obviously I'm theorizing. And this is kind of a generally thought upon theory that was to create a separation so that the audience could then buy into what was happening and have more empathy for the characters. And that's kind of a general art thing.
Yeah, that's a pretty universal rule of when you're trying to like hold a mirror to like, that's what sci-fi does. Like, it's
exactly,
like we learned that lesson back when Shakespeare was alive.
Exactly.
Sure, or before.
So he's using that same kind of thing to say, here's a separation. So when you see that person that's exactly like yourself in Cassio, you're gonna be able to have enough separation to go, that guy's a dick. I'm a dick.
And
or whatever it is.
Yeah, analogies don't work.
I'm not saying Cassio's a dick. Don't hold me to that.
Analogies don't work if your example is the exact same thing.
Exactly.
It has to be farther enough away for you to draw the parallel, for sure.
Yeah. And a lot of times, and it's interesting too, because, and I don't want to get into this partly because I don't know all the details, and partly because it would take 4 hours and be a totally separate episode. But if you look at the histories, right, he has to go with the family that's in charge now is perfect and every other family is bad. And if you look at some of the things that are happening in his other plays and his tragedies and his comedies, you see people that are a little bit analogizing the people in charge now, the royalty, but they're not the people that are in charge now. They're somebody from Italy in the, 1400s. So it's not you. So it's fine, right? It's that kind of thing.
Is Shakespeare a sassy bitch?
Shakespeare is a sassy fucking bitch. Yeah.
That's really funny. Like trying to like slip it in there while he really thinks.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
It's a fucking Shakespeare cinematic universe.
Shakespeare cinematic universe.
Shakespeare opera.
Theatrical universe.
The STU. Shakespeare theatrical universe.
Wait, can we get an F in there so it's STFU? Shakespeare theatrical fucking universe. Shut the fuck up.
Where's the shirt, Chloe?
I'm working on
go to Canva right now and make that fucking shirt.
I'm already on it.
All right. Now for the most important question.
Paul, I have Canva on my phone. Who do you think I am?
I'll wait till you start drinking. But now for the most important question. Where's Richard the Seventh?
What? What does that mean?
I looked on the list of plays and it was Richard the Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth, or it's Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth. Or like it skipped a number. Is what I'm saying.
Henry?
Henry. I'm sorry, not
Henry.
Where's Henry the Seventh?
I don't know. I don't know
Henry
English
the
history
Fourth,
well enough for
Fifth,
this
Sixth,
shit.
and Eighth.
Let me Google it. Who is?
Okay, if you don't know that one, I just thought.
Yeah, I just
thought I was. I
don't know.
Hilarious.
You are funny. You are always funny, but I don't know. Was it maybe he just wasn't interesting?
He was just a nobody.
I don't know.
He only had like 4 followers.
Lord of Ireland from his seizure of the crown.
No. Don't look him up in reality history.
I don't know.
I'm saying, why didn't Shakespeare write Richard VII? But if that's the easy answer, then fair enough.
Probably he was boring. That's my guess.
He was the only good leader who didn't have any drama.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? Yeah, a lot of the histories are chronological, which is the part of that question I do know the answer to. Like, a lot of them are like, Richard III ends, and then we pick up where we left off with the next one.
Does he? I imagine that you have a rough idea of the order in which he wrote his plays, like which were the early plays and which were the late plays.
Yeah.
Do they tend to stack up in one way or the other? Like all the comedies are kind of skew towards the early part, and then maybe like the tragedies towards the later. Like,
it's so funny you ask that because I don't always consciously have a list running in my head of like which one was before which and which one was after which. I know a couple of them. I know you have a vague idea. This one's middle-y, this one's endy, this one's beginning-y. But if I don't know, I often can theorize as to where it is, and my guesses are usually pretty good.
So, on a slightly zoomed out, if we're just talking about the categories of play, comedies, tragedies, and histories, is there one that skews towards? I mean, I imagine I could have just looked this up, but I thought it'd be fun to talk about.
No, so you've got a lot of histories right off the bat. Like he started with that.
It's like
he started with historical fiction.
What do you call it? Carving your teeth, or do you call it like
cutting his teeth?
Cutting his teeth on just like on like
stuff he could base it on. And like maybe that's how he was able to kind of win some favor with the crown and get more popular, and then he could write more of what he wanted. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. I'm guessing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, so he kind of, the thing is, too, he goes back and forth a lot. So he really started with a chunk of histories, and then he's kind of just dabbling all over the place. Titus Andronicus was pretty early in his career, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Part of that...
Man, that was so fucking good!
It's so good. But part of me is like, he wanted to interest people in, like, a bloodbath. Like, because you can advertise that on the street pretty well and be like, we killed, I think it's something like 32 or 37 people in this play. The body count is high. Like, go see Titus Andronicus. And then he gets you in there and he's like, let's talk about masculinity and war. Let's talk about society.
This is deeper than you thought it was.
The aftermath.
Do you really think that's how it went down?
I really do, yeah.
I totally think they like give you like a Batman trailer, but then like, oh no, it's actually like a hard-hitting philosophical like questioning about.
Yeah, totally. One thing that I always joke about with the backroom Shakespeare people is that we're always laughing about is like, oh well, there's this interesting metaphor, and that's for the lords that are coming and like want to feel really smart, and then you've got the butt joke, and that's for the groundlings, and the groundlings are the people that like paid a really small amount of money to go stand in the pit in the middle, like that was basically, which now would be the best seats in the house because that's like the orchestra section in the theater. It's like everything right in front of the stage,
so they can,
right, so you can hear them and see them really well. But like they're definitely the people that are gonna be like, yeah, butts. Like, if you have a big group of people close together, it's like, it's the mosh pit. It's the Shakespeare mosh pit.
That's fucking hilarious.
Butts.
Shakespeare mosh pit.
Everybody.
Is that a band name?
Yes.
Is that a band name?
It's a T-shirt, Paul. I'm going to Canva.
This kind of just occurred to me, but as we were talking about Titus, because like I was thinking about how that movie was so good and how Julie has such like a vivid kind of visual imagination and his this ability to make surreal things feel natural.
Yeah.
Have you so I'll just hold that for a second. That's a director now with the tools of cinema.
Yeah.
Trying to put on a play, and then you've read all of these Shakespeare plays. You specifically read Titus. You've been in productions of Titus, and you've like lived in Titus for a little while.
Yeah.
So you have a good idea from your imagination and from history of how a scene should go. After watching Titus, 1999, Anthony Hopkins, Julie Taymor, where we thought it was damn near perfect, like every scene was like well crafted. Do you think there are any parts where like they made the scene better than it was?
Like better than the roadmap on the page?
Yeah. Like were they like maybe that might be hard to answer, and I get it cuz like,
I know what you're talking about
because it involves you assuming what was in Shakespeare's head and then assuming they did it better.
Yeah.
But I mean, like sometimes there's been a very few instances, but some instances the movie's better than the book,
yeah, right. Or if you're an actor and you get commercial copy that's like, it's like, you know, I'm a millennial and I love my dad. Like, you know, you're kind of having to put some really good acting on it to make it feel human. Yeah. That kind of thing.
It might not be a fair question. It just occurred to me.
That's a really hard question, honestly, because it's a play that really is like in me now. So I have a very rich imagination when it comes to it. You know, I like have imagined a lot of things, but I think that when it comes to that film, if I were to try to analyze it as honestly as possible, I think the places where it moved beyond what the text could give us or what the original imagining of it could give us were like the moments where Anthony Hopkins is standing in front of, you know, two guys that are, I don't know if I want to give it away.
I guess you're
right. Two guys that are like hanging from chains in the air, or like, you know, the moments where we've got swords at the beginning of the war scene and then guns at the end, or the moment where we're in the fucking Coliseum and there's a huge crowd of soldiers around. Like, I think the theatricality went beyond the script for this movie.
So it amplified
what was there in a really beautiful way, and I think in a truthful way. And I think that when it comes to the scenes, I think that it's kind of incredible how close it was to my imagination in some ways. Like, I don't know, like maybe it's the specificity of some of that language that the text brings out in the actor, or maybe it's just that it happened to be something that was played in a way that I liked, or that I would have played it, or that I was interested in. But it really felt like, to me, it just felt so aligned, and something, it's, the language is so specific sometimes with Shakespeare that it really pulls aspects of your character in one direction. And there's a lot of ways to play a lot of things, which I think is why it's so endlessly fascinating to me. But there are some things that, like, there are some strands that if you hook onto that, it'll really pull your character in one direction. And I think if you go with that, you can really find, like, what's wanting to come to life off the page. And I know I sound like a hippie, but I really think that they took the blueprint of that text and listened to it in a really profound way that made for some honest performances that are no discredit to them as actors, because they had to find it and play it and live it and breathe it and make it real. But I think it was so good because it was exactly what was on the page.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about this. If you've listened to the previous podcasts, we kind of go gloss over the same points sometimes because we kind of keep naturally finding our way back there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, sometimes when we see a good one, and which is, and what I'm defining as good is something that, one, I could just understand without having to try, but two, just really like a strong through line of a story. I find myself saying, how could you play it any other way? Like, it seems everything resonated so well with what I think I understand about human nature, what was set up for the circumstances, what the path someone chose. It felt like, all things considered, it was kind of the only choice.
Yeah.
And that's a very hard thing to do when we're talking about people making like strong, passionate, sometimes even technically irrational decisions, but we're supposed to follow them into thinking that it's their only choice.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing to do, I think. And that's the thing where if you just kind of just like say the language really loud and really passionately without actually
getting into the
those fine
and the
strings,
specifics, exactly.
Then it can blow past the audience.
Yeah, I keep, especially when watching this movie, it felt like watching a Highwire act, that people were staying up on the wire.
Yeah, we specifically talked. I was asking you that, and I kind of prompted you for that answer in our conversation yesterday. I was saying sometimes I feel like Shakespeare is all or nothing, because there's always these, like, we're supposed to believe somebody wants to and feels justified in like this crazy act, like killing their wife or like doing something that like nobody reasonably would really ever do, but this character does it in this play. But to get them to that point is such a hard thing for us to follow if you don't make sure you drive home every single step to get there.
It's meticulous.
And I feel like if you miss one, then the next thing doesn't make sense, and then the next thing doesn't make sense, and it compounds.
Dominoes.
And I feel like it's all or nothing. And that's when you said you felt like you were watching a Highwire act when you're watching Shakespeare, which makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely feels like that. And I think that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that, because when I say what I just said about like it didn't feel like it was beyond the text. It felt like it was the text, because I feel like the text is kind of the wire, and it makes it more impressive that these people are doing flips on this Highwire.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the thing that I'm trying to do. And I think that we have to be careful not to trick ourselves that, like, we got through all the words, so we did it. We did the Highwire act. Like, if I walk across a Highwire but it's on the ground, or if I fall every 3 feet.
This analogy is losing traction real
weird.
quick.
but you know what I mean? Like, I think
if I like hang on on the Highwire and fucking
exactly.
and like shimmy across, it's not as impressive.
Yeah, I just think we got to be honest with ourselves. It's hard. It's definitely hard, and that's kind of why it's so worth doing. At least to me. I think that's why it keeps drawing me back in. That's why it's been the most fun thing that I've gotten to do in my career so far, I think.
I mean, from my perspective, certainly looks like it.
It's really fun.
All right, so the next thing I want to talk about was the historical accuracy. But I mean, like, this would be my argument for not holding fast to the historical purity of the plays. But it's my understanding that his plays weren't preserved perfectly from the moment he wrote them, as if they knew it was going to be they knew it was going to stand the test of time or be famous. He was just a playwright, a really good playwright, a really popular playwright. But once, like after his death, they had to go be collected. Could you talk about that?
Oh yeah. So this was a time when a lot of things were really new. Like, written history becoming more of a thing was really new. A lot more people being a lot more literate was really new.
So yeah, because the printing press was only like less than 100 years ago.
Yeah, it was very contemporary.
Yeah.
And
wait, when was the printing press? That was 1500s, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So 14 something? I don't know. Anyway,
but it was definitely a time where written history was becoming more of a thing. But, plays were still considered something that was very oral. It was very present of the moment. And one interesting thing, too, I don't know if you know this or if we talked about this. 1440, Paul Stafford.
So,
did you just come up with that?
For that to disseminate and, be more in wide use and
exactly.
diffuse into the culture would take about that much time.
For sure. So one thing that you might not know is the actors who were in the plays would only get their lines. So they get, the last line of the person's line before them, their line, and then the first line of the next person's
I was
line.
about to say, how would they know when it's their turn to speak if they only got their lines?
They just throw it in there, whatever. Obviously.
Do your best.
Yeah.
Go get him, Tiger.
Go on, Burbage.
Oh man, that's awful. Like I would just be
I know.
like kind of snoozing until I was like,
No.
wait, there it is.
But one thing that's
torture.
interesting is maybe it would make you be more present and actually have to listen to your partner's lines, but also it would kind of just make you waiting for.
I would just be like, it would be
waiting for your own
worse.
line. Yeah.
Like I would be
We
waiting.
did that as an
for-
exercise in acting school one time. It was fascinating.
I would just be waiting for the line, and I'd be sure I'd miss it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But no, it was really
hate
funny.
it.
I know, isn't it funny?
I hate it so
No,
much.
but it wasn't just for like, you know, whatever weird psychological purposes that we're talking about.
Practical purposes. They probably had like limited paper and limited like ability to write shit down.
Yep.
And he had to like written it by hand, so he couldn't be writing the whole play a bunch of times.
You got it. And they didn't want it to get stolen.
Funny.
They didn't want the plays to get stolen and then performed by other playhouses.
Because it was a
there's no
dog-eat-dog,
copyright.
cutthroat playwright
like if you
world.
got a good play, I'm gonna fucking put it on.
There's no copyright lawyers.
No.
Like I have this imagination now of somebody just like rounding together like a third of Shakespeare's play out of order from some actors and trying to put that on like it would work.
Paul, that is exactly what happened. They would send in people who could write like shorthand or write really quickly to watch Shakespeare's plays and write them down. So like sometimes people would get caught in the audience trying to write down the play, just like someone trying to record something or someone in a movie theater trying to record the screen, and they would like get in trouble. But unless they caught you doing that, they couldn't really get you.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. So then they would like go bring it to somewhere else and do it there. So that actually leads me to how we have these plays today. So years after Shakespeare's death, a bunch of his friends got together. So his friends were in his acting company, right? So a lot of them, what they had were their sides from the play. The sides that had like last line of this guy's line, my line, first line of the next guy's line.
They had
So they had that. So they're cobbling that together. Hopefully they have like one of Shakespeare's original copies, which, you know, may or may not. We don't know. We don't have the records. Like, we just have the first folio.
We just have what they say.
So that's the first folio.
Like the apostles.
Right. Exactly like the apostles. So it was like Jesus died. Here's me, Burbage, one of his disciples. Richard Burbage, disciple to our Lord Shakespeare.
I love it.
It really is a lot like that.
I'm wondering like what prompted that effort, as if like he died and they felt like they were like, you know, spoiled with the good wine of acting and plays for like a while, and then like nobody else could write good plays. Like, fuck this, we got to get Shakespeare's plays back. We have to do these again.
Honestly, I feel like that's part of it. Money was probably part of it. Like, we could make a lot of money off of this because everybody remembers it because it was so good.
So he was that famous at the time.
Or
like at least very famous.
I mean, he was pretty popular. Like a lot, like the Queen would come to his shows. Like he was hot shit for sure.
Got it.
Yeah, like not like fancy hot shit, but like unfancy hot shit, like scrappy hot shit.
I was gonna say like guilty pleasure hot shit. Like,
maybe.
Like was it just like juicy? I imagine a lot of the plays went over like kind of like gossip, like ooh, like
yeah,
like
scandalous. They have a scandalous air about them.
Exactly.
For sure.
They seem to have the same kind of it's fun for people who just like the scandalous nature, and then it's also fun for the people who are looking for like the deep undertones of like the philosophy that's behind it.
Yeah, for sure.
Or the things that it makes, the social commentary. Which is the mark of a good playwright. I mean, like, it speaks for itself. I mean, like, you know,
exactly.
It's
like a rock star. Like,
this is one of the reasons why I'm interested. Like, when I don't get me wrong, I can be sometimes about the art that I like and I feel knowledgeable about.
Yeah,
I could be a little bit stuck up sometimes, but I don't deny something that, like, if everybody likes it, like, there is something that they understand that's resonating with a lot of people across a lot of different demographics and psychographics. So like, and I would never discount. I feel like that would be just in my practical brain, that would be stupid to discount that as just like, fuck that. Like, who cares?
It's interesting, and I'm thinking too about like where we see Shakespeare now and in what context we see Shakespeare plays now. And like, you know, you go to the fanciest cultural institution in the city to go see your Shakespeare now. Like, and that's why I think one of the reasons that I like Backroom so much is because it's.
Can I stop you just to go back to my next question?
Please.
So I have two more questions, and the next one is, who's Shakespeare's target audience?
everyone. And I wish that everyone could see the big smile on my face. But it's like what we were talking about before. Like, he had to cater to the groundlings who, like, you know, some of them are not very well educated. Some of them are like and not of their own free will, like, because they didn't have any fucking money. Like, they just had enough money to come see some entertainment on the weekend.
A man can't change his stars.
Right. And then you've got the queen. Like, they're in the same audience. The queen is in the same audience as a guy who paid, like, nothing to get in, and, like, people are peeing in the aisles. Like, you know, it's and everyone in between. But and it's just this really interesting cultural moment that you have going on with Shakespeare, with this whole thing that's this whole situation that's been set up of these playhouses where, like, you have everyone, and that's kind of the cool thing. And I think part of what is so, you know, interesting to us now, like, that helps it be a little more transcendent, is because he knew at the time, I'm writing for everyone right now. Like, everyone's gonna see this, everyone needs to be interested in this. So now it kind of helps too, because since he was catering to everyone, it expanded who could be interested in it, and I think that kind of helps it reach across time as well.
Do you think he was writing with a, you know, 90s producer or 90s kind of like not hacky, this is not the word I'm looking for, but like focus group considering kind of philosophy, or like, okay, no, the kids love this stuff, so I gotta put this stuff in there. The queen loves this stuff, gotta put this stuff in there. Or do you think he was writing things and situations that reflected the truth of the world he saw, and that inherently is interesting to everyone?
I think both. I think that there are definitely times that you can see in his plays, like, oh, he's just kind of pandering, you know, and I think that that includes some of the less popular plays, or where he did it a little less gracefully. Or sometimes he was collaborating with other people too. That happened as well. But I think that those two things kind of fed each other for him, and I think that that's something that I definitely want to learn from as someone who tells stories or writes sometimes. I think that he was stuck in a situation or a box where he had to make sure he catered to everyone. I think he tried not to pander. I think sometimes he did. But I think that he tried to use that in his favor and as a strength instead of a weakness, as a feature instead of a glitch.
A bug?
Instead of a bug. Yeah, that's what it is.
Do you, I don't mean to press you on this. I'm not trying to like gotcha, but do you have any examples on hand of you think where he might have been pandering?
Oh God.
Maybe not. Go ahead. If you got one.
I don't know.
Maybe not like a line from a play, but maybe like a certain part of a play, or one play where it happens a lot.
I do feel like there are moments in, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to think of like a really solid example. I know I'm thinking of something from Two Noble Kinsmen, but I can't remember what it is. There's like something in Two Noble Kinsmen that I've always felt like, oh, that's so pandery.
Really?
Yeah, but I can't remember what scene I'm thinking of because it's not.
It's fine. I mean,
but you know, it's the ones that feel more like cobbled together as opposed to fluid. Like I think Midsummer is the perfect example of one of his plays that has a lot going on that caters to different people but doesn't feel like it's pandering.
It's like good pop music.
Yeah.
It's like pop music written by like someone who knew what they were doing.
That's so funny you say that. One of the best productions of Midsummer that I ever got to be a part of was one where we finished Act 1. I was playing Titania and we closed Act 1 with me lip syncing to Sexy and I Know It to the guy playing bottom.
Wait, are you saying LMFAO is good pop music? No, I'm kidding. I'm just being snobby. I'm joking.
Never said that. No, I'm just kidding. That song's dope. I love that song.
You do love that song.
I
do. So you just meant that the connection between that play and like pop music or pop culture, just like the
yeah, I was just noting that.
Yeah, it gets a lot of, for those of you who haven't seen it, it gets a lot of connection with like general rom-coms that we see today. Like a lot of people like feel like that play influenced a lot of modern rom-coms and rom-coms ever since it was written.
Yeah.
Because it has such that kind of style. And so, like, I guess something that is considered kind of like cultural, like candy, like sugar-filled candy, is just like, it's just made to be liked. And sometimes people can like shit on that or feel like it's cheap. But this is an example of somebody like at the top of their game intellectually, like making something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess I was just trying to like wrap it up for somebody in my position who wouldn't have known what we were talking about.
Yeah, it reminds me of that thing that we talk about with archetypes. And I'm sorry you're trying to wrap it up, but I want to say
No,
one
no,
more
I'm not
thing.
wrapping up the episode. I was wrapping up that point.
No, I want to
go ahead and unwrap it, Chloe.
Yeah. Just rip it off. Archetypes, the thing we talk about with that, where it's like we get you in with this archetype and then we trick you basically because this person's a lot deeper than they originally looked. But we've given you this shorthand of like, oh, they're the jock. So then you can, have that already done. And now that we've done that work, we can get a little deeper and find out who this person actually is. And they're more complicated than we originally realized. And to me, that's a really good basic way to look at a lot of what Shakespeare is doing. Not only with characters, but also with plot structures. And it's funny that you brought up the like comedy, tragedy, history, because we all, I think, within the Shakespeare community, put them under those three things. And literally, when you look up the plays, they're always listed in those three categories.
And every time I've like asked you about it, like, or asked other people about it, they say it like I'm supposed to know what they're talking about. And it was just,
oh, you're supposed to know what I'm talking about.
It was just funny. Like, and there's a podcast's worth of conversations to dissect all this stuff. But that was one of the things that always stood out. Just like, oh yeah, it's one of the histories, it's one of the tragedies, it's one of the comedies. I'm like.
Right.
Like,
so
I mean, I guess I know what this means, but like, I'm like, what?
No, it's really interesting too, especially when it comes to Shakespeare, because ostensibly, a lot like if a play ends sad, it's a tragedy. If a play ends happy and everybody gets married, it's a comedy. But there's so much more complicated than that, and that's what's interesting to me too. Like, remember that joke that we talked about in Hamlet, where Polonius is like, they've got all these plays. They've got comedies, tragedies, historical comical, comical pastoral, comical historical, tragical pastoral. And that's Shakespeare poking fun at himself a little bit. I mean, we don't know for sure.
There's blue, there's green, there's blue-green, there's blue, there's turquoise, there's...
Right, like he thinks he's an artist. He made blue, green, turquoise, purple. Like, it's him making fun of himself. But I think that's exactly it, is he's like, we have a comedy, or here's a good example, Titus. Like, we have a horrible tragedy today about revenge and blood, and there's so many people that die in it, and somebody gets their tongue cut out. And so then when you go out on the street and tell people about that, like, they're like, oh, I gotta go see that. Like, yeah, it appeals to my, like, carnal sensibilities. And then they get in, and surprise, motherfuckers, it's intellectual as fuck, and it makes you think about your feelings, and how the complicatedness of mortality, and, like, what happens when people are pushed to their edge, and what does masculinity mean, and what does it mean to be a soldier who comes back from war, and the psychological implications of that. Surprise! Like, I feel like that
was a long surprise.
I know, it's a really long surprise. It's a 3-hour surprise. But I do feel like, I feel like Shakespeare was really smart about, like, packaging all that deep shit in a pop culture little package and giving it to you and saying, here you go. Because you get both. You get your vegetables and cake. Yeah,
that's fair. I mean, that sounds disgusting, but it's fair.
Sounds terrible. But yeah. I think, it even though we categorize them under those three just for the sake of convenience, like, oh, that's a sad one, that's a happy one. Mm-hmm. They all have, like, strains of each of those. There are even 3 plays called the problem plays that people have such trouble categorizing under comedy or tragedy.
Wait, which are they?
So it's All's Well That Ends Well.
Okay.
Measure for Measure. Oh, what's the other one? It's one that's less popular. But those are 2 of them.
That's super funny. Yeah, Measure for Measure is in the tragedies.
For some people, that makes sense.
And in the website that I Googled and it came up, like, it just happened to place them. It was just like it was just a organized way to, like, categorize the text. Like, it just had links for, like, every act and every scene, and it was just,
so, like, they're all under categories for simplification.
They put it into the tragedies.
Yeah. And at the time, like, people would categorize those plays even more strictly by those, but he was kind of messing around with the structure.
I mean, it totally is a gradient, especially something as complicated as a play. Like, to fit into a genre, I feel I get it. I get the reason why, and I get the reason why it shouldn't be bound by that.
It's so funny when people ask me what you like is about. I'm like, A lot. It's about a lot. They're like, is it a comedy? I'm like, yeah. They're like, is it sad? I'm like, sometimes.
You sound like me and my band in high school, just like, what genre are you guys? I don't know, man. It's just so hard to categorize.
I know, honestly.
We're a little bit of everything.
And like Shakespeare.
Every band is like
honestly,
that.
And like Shakespeare, I feel like I just want to categorize it as one thing. So when people ask, I just go, it's a comedy.
Yeah,
it's a comedy, and then more people will be interested in it.
You have to have an elevator pitch
a comedic web series that's a rom-com girl meet girl. I want to listen to that. But if I'm like, it's a lot of things. No one's gonna watch it.
It's so funny us getting into like, you know, making a web series or like filmmaking or like these things that are like very high level of difficulties just to like pull off, and then but the lesson and the things that you've like known about, like tropes about that process the whole time, and then learning them like organically for the first time, just like what genre. It's like, you know, like,
Shakespeare, help me.
And then figuring out how to make an elevator pitch for it, and then realizing elevator pitches have a really specific reason for it to exist.
Yeah.
And just like why people need to put them in small boxes so you can sell it.
Yeah.
Which is so funny.
It's great.
Okay, so here's my last question that I was very excited to ask you about, because I think I'm hoping it will be intriguing to you. Do you think the popularity chart of Shakespeare's body of work is appropriate to their quality? It makes them saying, do you think Shakespeare's most popular plays are the better ones, or do you think there are some undiscovered gems that deserve more appreciation and attention?
I think I'm totally going to surprise you with this answer. Yes. I think that the popular ones are the better ones. I really do.
I don't think you don't surprise me with that, but I wanted to just make sure that we're saying that, because that's, you know, like, I don't know, like again, the landscape, like is there more to discover, or is it like it kind of shook out the way it should, is what you're saying?
I think it shook out the way it should. There is so much to mine.
You've read all of them.
I have not read all of them. No. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones I've read.
Out of the 38 he's wrote, you've read what?
At least 30.
Okay.
Like, I think there's a history or two I haven't read. I can't remember. I think there's one in the problem place. Maybe it's Troilus and Cressida. I don't think I've read Troilus and Cressida. Anyway,
I'm gonna call it good for our purposes.
I've read most of them. For instance, some of the less popular ones have interesting parts in them. Like Two Noble Kinsmen, I don't think it's the perfect play. I think there's a lot going on with it. I would be interested to direct it, because I think I would like to steer it kind of in a direction, or at least like try to figure out what's going on in this text. But I think that the scene with the two women who clearly are in love with each other, with these two guys pining over the one girl and like being like, oh, I love her. It would be so funny to stage in like these really interesting specific ways. But like, what I'm talking about are like, there are gems in those, and as opposed to like, this is a masterpiece or like masterclass. Like this is all good.
It's an okay song with a great guitar solo.
Yeah. Like Hamlet is brilliant. Romeo and Juliet, brilliant. Macbeth, brilliant. Richard III, fucking great. Like, I really do think that it shakes out in a really similar way that it should.
Yeah.
I think that, honestly, this is interesting because we've been talking about Titus a lot in this episode. Titus Andronicus, I think, is underrated.
So is Taming of the Shrew, in my opinion.
I mean, I think so too, but I think it's, I gotta be honest, I think it's for a good reason. I think that people should not produce Taming of the Shrew if they're not fucking ready for it.
Yeah, that one is more of a tightrope walk than I think anything else.
I totally agree with that.
I can't believe Zephyr really pulled it off.
I can't either.
Honestly.
I can't either at all. So yeah, I think.
Listen to episode 4 if you haven't listened. I think everybody you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, really, seriously, it's fascinating. I didn't like that play until now. I think that people should absolutely be trepidatious producing Taming of the Shrew. I think that everyone's heard of Taming of the Shrew. Not a lot of people have seen Taming of the Shrew, and I think that's exactly how it should be. I think that, I think that Hamlet is so good, but I think that it's a little bit of a tightrope walk too. I think that it's there are some plays with Shakespeare that I'm like, it's impossible to pull off a bad production of it. Like Midsummer. Like, it's not impossible. It's hard to pull off a production of Midsummer that doesn't delight you, at least in some parts.
Yeah. I didn't love the one we saw. That you don't get. Like, you don't understand what's happening, you know? I didn't love the one we saw. We used to watch the movie of it, but I mean, like, but I still, I recognized the rom-com nature of it that made it, you know, delightful.
And you weren't totally lost about what was happening.
No, I mean, I had to try harder than I wanted to like get all the
you
little
had to
pieces.
try harder than I wanted you to too. But like, it made sense at least. It made sense. It made you laugh at some points.
Shakespeare's helping a lot with the way he wrote it.
It wasn't boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think Midsummer like is one of the most produced Shakespeare plays. I think it absolutely should be because it's not horrendously difficult to do. There's a lot of great things that a lot of people can key into that have influenced our culture today. So we get them and we recognize them. I think the reason that people think Hamlet is a whiny bitch, which is the thing I hear most about Hamlet, is that people don't play him specifically enough and don't set up the circumstances for him well enough, like we talked about.
Yeah.
I think that Macbeth is pretty well done a lot of the time. Like, I think that, you know, the reason, I think, you know, it's possible there's a curse on it, but I think part of the reason that people think that is it's hard to pull off in the physical way of like, there's a lot of broadsword fights in it. There's a lot of physical stuff happening. There's a lot of effects happening. So I think it makes sense to me that people produce that one a lot because it's so fucking good. And there's a lot of really interesting things happening in it. Romeo and Juliet, also awesome. Like, it's the way that I always describe it, and that I love when other people describe it this way too. It's somewhat common within the Shakespeare community. Romeo and Juliet is a romantic comedy until Mercutio dies. Everything in it is set up to be a comedy, like a rom-com, and like against all odds, we found each other and we fell in love, and our families finally came around until Mercutio dies, and then everything shifts and it's just tragedy train until the end.
Yeah.
Like it all drives into the ground. And I think that's brilliant. Like, I've always
wanted... what that sound reminds me of?
Yeah.
They just popped into my head. Not that these stories are the same.
Yeah.
But the genre mixing that you don't expect, and it still gets remembered as just one of those genres.
Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead.
Yes.
It's a comedy until it's not, and then it becomes, like, it still retains, like, comedic aspects, but, like, it gets real serious.
Yeah.
Like, real fucking serious for, like, a little bit. And then it, like, ends on this happy tone, but people only remember it as just, like, a comedy. But, I mean, like, just, like Romeo and Juliet gets played as a tragedy, and I think it's easy to forget that you can shift between genres in a movie, but it's, like, sometimes we forget to do it, and we just kind of put it all in the same box.
Yeah.
And you think a higher resolution of understanding that would not I feel like we're like calling like people who produce these like people like dim, but you mean like a higher resolution.
We're not. It's so hard.
Exactly, but you think a higher resolution of that understanding of like where that line is, where it becomes from comedy to tragedy, would it really help inform how you should produce it and how everybody should play their characters?
Like, I think that the comedy, tragedy, history categories are really useful for us when we're trying to like sell them to the public, or when we're trying to like, you know, pitch it, to give our elevator pitch. But when we move back into the rehearsal room, when we move back into like, okay, now we're going to tell this story, now we're going to produce it, now we're going to rehearse it, we got to go back with a fine-tooth comb, which is, I think, part of the Highwire Act, and I think part of what makes it so difficult. Like, you know, when we're thinking about Hamlet, like we go into part of the reason that I'm sure you're interested in producing it, whether you're the actor who's been wanting to play Hamlet for 20 years, or whether you're the director who's been wanting to direct Hamlet for 20 years, you're interested in Hamlet's inner emotional life because it's fascinating. Like, it's fascinating figuring out, like, you know, what he's thinking about and, like, you know, going through this situation. But you got to set up the situation around him for him to go through. Otherwise, he just feels like a whiny bitch.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's funny, like, it must be agony sometimes. I haven't seen that many productions of Hamlet. I've seen like a handful, but everyone I've seen, he seems like a whiny bitch.
Right.
And so like it is just so funny to have that. Anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say, the problem is we get distracted by what we love most about it sometimes, and that can be our tragic downfall.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to produce a comedy over here. I want the triumph. I want to be a triumphant hero at the end of this.
Are you saying Hamlet's a comedy?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what I'm saying at all. Oh, God. Fortinbras walks in at the end. Da, 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 da. I mean, it's a comedy for Fortinbras.
Yeah. So, anyway, I'm basically out of questions at this point. That was like all of the ones that ran through my head just from trying to decide on the next few episodes for us to do for this podcast. And I thought it would be useful if we're, for the function of our podcast, for, this conversation to be privy to everybody else.
Yeah, I'm glad we dug into it because, there's not a ton we can dig into about his life and what he did in his life because we don't know. We don't know that much. It was 400 years ago and they didn't keep very good records, especially of his life. So anything that we can glean or talk about is really interesting, I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to give, again, a landscape of Shakespeare for some people in my position. Again, we had this conversation for the first time, and for me asking these questions so specifically and targeted to kind of get an idea of what we're talking. It's like you're going to go see a Marvel movie, but you don't know what the MCU is.
Yeah.
And so just, you don't have to know every single detail about every play, but I'm hoping this will be useful for someone who's trying to enjoy it and doesn't really understand, the context of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is for me in an alternate universe, and I hope there's more people like me.
More Pauls. I do too. I hope there are more people like you too.
Yeah, look at you. You're so sweet. So I would turn it over to you now, and I would ask, for someone in your position, do you think there's something else that would be useful for someone like me to know before going to see any play? Something that would kind of just apply to Shakespeare in general?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is a common misconception about Shakespeare is that it's all in iambic pentameter. And first, let me define what iambic pentameter is, because some people might be like, what the fuck is iambic
Shakespeare
pentameter?
101.
So iambic pentameter is the poetry that some of Shakespeare is written in. If you read a Shakespearean sonnet or any sonnet, that's written in iambic pentameter. And that's basically 10 beats in a line. So you've got da-da, 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 which is meant to kind of sound like a heartbeat. And if you speak a breath of words, or a sentence, that sounds weird, a breath of words, but it's true. If you speak a sentence, a lot of the time you break it up into 10 syllables. So, if I speak naturally, I'm trying to think of something I could say I went to Whole Foods to get a big Coke.
Why don't you just say a Shakespeare sonnet line?
That would help, wouldn't it? It's funny. People always go to be or not to be. That is the question, which is not 10 beats. Isn't that funny? It's 11. So, but it's funny because it leaves you hanging, and it's a little extra because you can't even fit that thought into that line. So it's, to be or not to be. That is the question. Which is just so interesting. I'm sorry. I'm a nerd. Let me go back to real life. I'll do a line from a sonnet. So, now I'm nervous and I can't think of any. So let me not to the marriage of true minds. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. So the idea is that every other syllable is accented. So let me not to the marriage of true minds. Which is also interesting because it means the last word of every line is emphasized. So minds is emphasized, which helps lead us into the next line. But anyway, this is all actor stuff that I have to worry about, that I don't want you to have to worry about as the audience. But suffice to say, iambic pentameter is what is spoken by a large number of characters in a large number of Shakespeare plays. But sometimes, I would even say a good amount of time, and I would also say more than you expect, Shakespeare characters are just speaking. It's not in poetry. This especially happens if the characters are lower class. This especially happens if the characters are stressed out. Even if a character is a very high social station, if they get too stressed out, sometimes they stop speaking in poetry. Or if they're stressed out, but they're not totally overwhelmed yet, sometimes they'll speak in iambic pentameter that's kind of fucked up. Or if they're already just kind of fucked up in general, they just start speaking fucked up iambic pentameter. Lady Macbeth will oftentimes just speak poetry, but it is not the same as how everyone else is speaking. So just to give it, just let me bottom line all of that weird nerd talk that I just threw at you to say that a lot of the times Shakespeare characters are speaking poetry, but also a lot of times they're not, which is really interesting. So if you're ever intimidated by poetry, is what I would say to you and an audience member, don't worry about it. Sometimes people will just be talking. And sure, they'll say like thee and thou sometimes, but like that just means you. So it'll be okay. I feel like that's something I want to say to like everyone in the world, which is why I wanted to say it now. So, yeah, so iambic pentameter, interesting. That's how the poetry is structured if there is poetry. Sometimes there's not. The first folio is the main place that we get all the Shakespeare plays from, but also the quarto.
Wait.
So
what's the first folio?
So first folio is the Bible that all the disciples sat down and wrote after Shakespeare died.
Got it.
And then you've got the quarto, which is the less accurate version that came from, I don't know if that's a good overall thing to say, but if I'm giving a general swipe, it's the less accurate version that gave us a couple of the other plays that we didn't have before. I can't remember which ones, but like it didn't include all the plays in the first folio, but included some plays that weren't in the first folio. But it's interesting because some of the plays are in both and we can compare them and they're slightly different. And it's generally thought that the first folio is more accurate. But like if you look at some of the speeches, they're like to be or not to be is also in the quarto and it's a little bit fucked up. Like it's not what you generally think of as that speech. And we're pretty sure that it was because it was copied down wrong, either by someone who was trying to steal it for another theater or, you know, it was a side that was copied down wrong or something. But isn't that funny?
Mm-hmm.
Is this too nerdy? Am I not helping at all?
It's not connecting with me very much. It's interesting facts, but no, if I was going to go see a Shakespeare play, it wouldn't specifically be helpful to me. But it's interesting. I agree that it's very interesting.
It's like interesting. I'm not saying that like you need to know it to go into a play. I'm just saying like if there's other things. I mean,
that's what I was asking. I'm gearing it towards my people.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't want to like shit on it or anything, but I mean, like, I'm kind of looking for. I mean, not everything we said was like super pertinent to like if you were about to see a play, but I mean, I'm just trying to give a landscape. I feel like you're jumping into like super granular, like little interesting facts. Honestly,
we don't have a ton of interesting facts. I just wanted to share like some of the only facts we have that I think are interesting.
I mean, it is interesting.
And I what I was feeling like was like, oh, we covered the stuff that you might need to know like outside of.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So I was like just gonna share something extra that's interesting.
Well, yeah. It is interesting, for sure. Like, there's a lot of, like, little granular things that are interesting about that world. It's like a little nugget in an RPG game, like a little Easter egg that you're finding. That is super interesting. But, again, for the functional purpose of, like, the landscape thing, I only know to ask what I think I don't know. But I am also ignorant of the things that I may need to know that I don't know to ask.
Totally.
And so I was kind of throwing it to you for possibly, like, you know, again, in that it's difficult to throw that question to you because it involves you feeling like you understand where my knowledge ends and where it needs to go to, like, again, the overview landscape. So it was always possible that you were going to miss the mark on that, right. But that's not your fault.
No, but I think this is good for me too, because even though that was kind of a misfire, it's good for me to know that you don't need or necessarily want, it's interesting, but necessarily want to know that.
Yeah.
You know, so that I think that also helps contextualize for the nerds listening, like, they don't need to know that.
Yeah, maybe, or at least I specifically don't. I'm trying.
I think you're a very open-minded person. So I think if you were like, okay, Chloe, I think no one's gonna care.
I'm trying to walk that line. This is our first podcast, so like, and I know there's like at some point there may be an audience, so it's like I have to like at least assume the responsibility of speaking for a subsection that were subscribed to like generally what I'm talking about. So I'm trying to like speak for those invisible people.
Yeah.
But
it's fine. I've got a nice voice. People could listen to that for a minute and then we'll move on. We figured it out.
But yeah, like again, I'm a super functional, so I want to know what I need to know to understand the play better, and then I will make my like artistic and like philosophical judgments based on that. But like I feel like a lot of times in the productions we see, it's just hard to overcome that first hurdle of like understanding what's going on.
Here's a question.
Why.
Do you feel like it's helpful or interesting to you to know that like not everything that's spoken is poetry, or do you not care?
No, I wouldn't have necessarily cared that
Cool.
much about that.
That's good to know. I'm just curious.
I know I understand what iambic pentameter is, but like that's not what's keeping me. Like I wouldn't be like, oh, most of it's not iambic pentameter. Now I'll go see it. Like I was gonna go see it. Whoever's gonna go see it, was gonna go see it like independent of us. But I mean, what I would like to know would be about like, you know, maybe the history, or maybe like this play specifically. These play, if you're going to go see a comedy, was earlier in his career or later, like those things that and that may inform a little bit of context
that's so funny, because that feels so specific to me.
A different lens to appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong here. Somebody
totally,
like I don't see a way to make use of certain information, and if I don't, I'll remain ignorant. But I mean, I'm trying to, but I'm just
totally.
I don't see a way for those small things.
I think what I'm feeling, what I was seeing was like, oh, that information's super useful to me as an actor. It's not useful to an audience member, exactly. And it's actually good that it's not useful to an audience member, because it's something that I can do that's like kind of that invisible work that helps you connect to it without you knowing. Surprise.
Exactly. So for every art form and every performance, for sure. And so, but yet, you do, I think, hold a lot of information in your head for me to mine for my use of understanding what I'm watching. Mm-hmm. And so what remains is for us to communicate that out. And that's what we're doing now. We're teasing it out.
Yeah.
So fair. Like that we're going to miss sometimes, but totally. That's just how we figure it out. But anyway, that's why I have to spend so much time like painting what I'm shooting for.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can see it and help me get there.
Yeah.
So given that context, is there anything else that comes to your mind, or we feel like we covered most of it?
The only other thing that I might share, and it's quick, so feel free to be like, shut up, is they didn't have an official director. It was just, you know, Shakespeare was the playwright. He brought the play to the actors put it together, they put it on. Like, they made the decisions about, what am I wearing? Where do I walk on the stage?
Well, the way I think about that is that I would connect it to today, where they have a very specific director who makes all the decisions,
right?
Which is very different, and sometimes can steer the play in, for lack of a better word, the wrong direction. And so, how do you think not having a director informed how he wrote plays?
That is such a good question. I can write a thesis. I mean, that's
like
that.
The next logical question. I mean, like that. I mean,
it is.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just so for me. If in order for me to gain any use from that, it means nothing unless it informed how he wrote plays.
Oh my god! This is
so now I can understand how I should understand the lines.
I'm sorry, I'm overlapping you, but this is fascinating. So, the thing we were just talking about having specific threads of characters, I feel like sometimes. And I've been in specific situations like this before every once in a while where, you know, it feels like a director really wants to put a concept onto a Shakespeare play, especially if they're like, I have a concept for this character and they should be like this, where they can sometimes ignore what's going on in the text because they want to put their imprint on it as a director. Whereas I think if you're a really smart Shakespeare director, sometimes you have to forget a little bit of what you know about making a lot of specific choices about characters, because sometimes the Shakespeare's text has made some of those choices for you because at the time it kind of had to, because there wasn't a director, or, you know, it was trying to fill that gap. So I mean, even at the most basic level, if you look at some of Shakespeare's text, you can see stage directions in the lines because there are no stage directions either. So, like, what was I just looking at yesterday? I was looking at something that said, I was looking at the prince's line in Romeo and Juliet, where he said something about, like, throw down this weapon. And he was talking about how the weapon has been, like, filled with the blood of your neighbor, and that's a problem. Which, I know, isn't that great? I can't remember the exact words.
Giving her like a whoa look.
Yeah. So throw this weapon that has been filled with the blood of your neighbor to the ground, which implies to me the prince has not only walked into this scene, he has grabbed the weapon out of one of their hands and is now holding it, because he doesn't say that, he says this weapon. And that's a kind of vague direction that I'm like grabbing something out of. But there are even more specific directions than that are like, here I fall to my knees, things like that. Like, Shakespeare's telling you what to do. And if you listen to it, it gives you some good stuff because he's giving you a stage direction that like is in line with the other stuff that he's writing. So it helps steer you in the right direction. So in a way, Shakespeare's like helping direct a little bit, which can be good or can be annoying to a modern director with modern sensibilities of like, I want them to cross up stage here. It's like, no, I have to kneel because that's what the text says I do. And you can cut it if you want to too, which is then you kind of taking over and being the director a little bit. And sometimes that can be good and sometimes it can be bad. Like it just depends on if you and Shakespeare have a similar idea in mind, And I think that also goes in line with what we were saying before about like,
in your experience, which one happens more often?
With them going in line or them trying to go off on their own?
In your experience, not what do you think happens more often in the world, in your personal experience, which one happens more often?
That's really hard.
I
think
50-50?
I would say it's kind of 50-50.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I've been fortunate enough to work with some humble, smart as fuck directors, and I've also watched a lot of directors get really frustrated. And I think that I've had about I feel lucky that I've had a kind of even split.
Yeah, we learn just as much from the good as we do from the bad, for sure.
Yeah.
Or probably more from the bad sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, man, this is really interesting to think about. I really like that question that you asked me because I think that, and it might seem simple, but I think it's...
I don't think it's simple.
It's complicated.
I think, it's a big package. But, I mean, that's, in my opinion, that was just me following the thread. It wasn't like, it was just, that's what I would ask. Again, my goal every time is just to understand. But since that's the biggest hurdle, like we have to unpack all these different things.
Yeah.
And I'm hopefully there is an episode in here or a combination of episodes that somebody will listen to and it will do that work for them of like being entertaining, but also unpacking it so they can, so they can unpackage it and enjoy a play that they otherwise would have been confused by. And so that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Because this happened to me enough times from just movies in general of like somebody giving me the necessary context of like how this was done or what this was trying to do.
Yeah.
And immediately it clicked. And now I love that movie that I used to hate.
Mm-hmm.
And Shakespeare. For talking to you and seeing enough productions and like giving it enough energy and enough of a chance to show me that it was always accessible.
Yeah, and I do feel like I want to indoctrinate people into that Shakespeare theatrical fucking universe.
Yeah, no, I mean, like,
but at the same time, I also feel like, as an artist, I want to help bridge that gap for people that are just walking into a play with no previous knowledge. And I think that I should be able to do that.
Yeah, it should be possible.
Yes.
But
I think that the way to figure out how to do that is to talk to you. And figure out how. Because I can say things like, oh, well, iambic pentameter and this and that. And that's going to mean nothing to you. But I don't know that unless I talk to you.
Yeah. No, yeah. And so that's our argument. That's your argument is that, I mean, and mine too, is that with the right approach, I mean, it's not going to be, nothing can ever be universal, but Shakespeare specifically is very gettable and it's not jazz and it's very, it can come across the way it's like in a very accessible way and be
it's
hard-hitting.
Kind of pop.
Yeah, so exactly, which is so interesting because I think most people would not see it that way.
No.
So I'm sure there's other people screaming from the mountaintops saying the same thing that we're trying to say, but we're trying to get at it because I feel like I don't see it enough places. Mm-hmm. So that's us reiterating the goal of this podcast for the 1000th time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really all I had, and that's kind of the soul of this conversation we were trying to have was trying to create a landscape. This maybe could have been episode 1, but I kind of want to just jump into the meat of like getting through some stories. Sure.
And I think it was useful informing this conversation too.
Yes. So, if you've been listening to this podcast and you kind of are on the layman side and you have been entertained because I imagine you made it to episode 7.
Are you not entertained?
Because you've been entertained because you made it to episode 7, but you still don't have like a general, like fundamental way to look at Shakespeare.
Yeah, view of the landscape.
Hopefully this helped. And so now we're going to leave you with a very funny anecdote that me and Chloe are endlessly tickled by. But
I'm so tickled.
I've watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine since it started, but Chloe is just getting introduced by it.
Just got into it.
And as you know, we're going through these Shakespeare episodes, and I don't know, just watching a lot of that like style of acting. We are watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and we're seeing Captain Holt, played by what's his name?
Andre Brower, and I'm just like, every time he like says something with this specific diction, I'm like, Chloe, I bet you'd be really good at Shakespeare. Yeah, and I went, Paul, I swear to God this man has played Othello. I guarantee you that this man has played Othello.
And so we looked it up.
And after just a little bit of digging, I found a Chicago Tribune article, because he's from Chicago, talking about him in his early career. So this is 1991 when he was 28. Don't think too much about his age. I'm sure he wouldn't want that. But it introduces him, and then it goes on to say, like, you know, you may have known him from the film Glory, where he played a soldier named Joseph. You may know him from a couple other things that were like television stuff. But then it goes on to say, his most significant mark, however, has been made on the Shakespearean stage. Though only 28 and less than 3 years out of the Juilliard School of Drama, he has performed in Coriolanus, Twelfth Night, Much Ado About Nothing, and King John for the New York Shakespeare Festival. His most recent and perhaps most critical success has been in the just concluded production of Othello at Washington's Shakespeare Theater at the Folger, which has been called the finest Shakespeare company in America. And I just wanted to say, like, it's so cool. Like, I don't know. I think it's really neat that we can see the specificity and the attention to detail that he uses with language in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yeah. And automatically we're like, oh, he must have done some Shakespeare and like cares about it, because what it feels like to me, and like you said, it feels Shakespearean.
The style,
I want to define what we're talking about when we're talking about that, because, you know, we could mean he's pretentious and heightened and like lofty, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the way that he digs into language. Like, what was the thing he said? It was like it was something that started with C in every word.
Yeah,
and he just leaned into the consonants.
You can throw in any sentence. He could be like, I am going to eat an apple. Like, and it would be like just like that. And I mean, yeah, obviously that sentence is ridiculous and without any context, but they definitely mine that style for his comedy. Like, the writers use that, and they either told him to lean into it, or he said, I'm doing this, and they wrote around it. But that is like the source of some of the comedy, but it is just such a specific style, and also like a specific skill set.
Yes.
To be able to deliver stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's just funny to, like, you know, just throw it in this complete foreign land. And I don't know, it was tickling to me to feel like I recognized it. Yeah. In a place where it wasn't, you know, obvious that's what it was. Yeah. And then we just kept patting ourselves in the back because we were right about it.
It was so fun. And I just like, oh, he's just so great and cuddly and like comedic. And you know what I really feel right now? I really want to see him play Othello. Right? Or I want to see him play. I'm sure he was fucking Benedict in Much Ado. Oh my God. I want to see him play Benedict again. Like, I just want to see him in a Shakespearean production right now. Yeah. No, I want to be in one with him. Yeah. That's what I want. There you go.
Visualize
it. What's the word? Manifest it. Vision board. Chloe Baldwin 2020. Here we go. Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's pretty much all we had for you. But
I hope. Oh yeah.
Go ahead. Until next time.
I'm Chloe Baldwin.
I'm Paul Stafford.
And we hope the gap just got a little bit smaller. Thanks for listening to Shakeshero. You can check out our website and email us your suggestions at shakeshero.com, or you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the handle Shakeshero. We're on Spotify and Apple Music, so please review, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode.